Get on the ground now! Officer Miller's voice, barely past the cusp of manhood, yet already steeped in a harsh, unearned authority, sliced through the mundane afternoon hum of Oak Haven's busy downtown street. The old man, Elias Vance, didn't flinch, didn't react, didn't even seem to register. The command bellowed inches from his ear. He just stood beside his dented, faded blue pickup truck, a relic from a bygone era, much like himself, his pale eyes clouded with gentle confusion rather than fear or defiance. Officer Miller, barely 23, took this stillness as insolence. His partner, Officer Davis, a few years older and a touch more seasoned, shifted uneasily. Before Davis could utter a word of caution, Miller's hand went to his taser. A bright yellow arc of electricity crackled violently, bridging the gap between the prongs and Elias's thin, worn jacket. The old man's body seized, a marionette whose strings were suddenly electrified, and he collapsed onto the grimy pavement. With a sickening thud, he had been trying to decipher a poorly painted curb marking, wondering if this was a legitimate parking spot for his pharmacy run. For this simple, innocent confusion, he was met with brutal, incapacitating force. 6 minutes, from the moment the barbs hit Elias to the moment the first black SUV screamed around the corner, just 6 minutes was all it took for one officer's arrogance to trigger an intervention from the highest levels of national security. If you believe every veteran deserves our utmost respect, regardless of how they appear, comment "Veterans deserve honor" below this video. Elias Vance was a ghost in his own life, a whisper of a man navigating a world that had long since deafened him, both literally and figuratively. At 78, his frame was stooped, not just by age, but by the weight of secrets and sacrifices silently borne for decades. His threadbare coat, meticulously patched at the elbows, and his calloused hands spoke of a life lived with quiet dignity amidst enduring hardship. Few in the bustling, indifferent city of Oak Haven ever gave him a second glance, seeing only Endopaispai, old man, perhaps homeless, certainly insignificant. They couldn't see the steel in his spine, forged in crucibles they couldn't imagine. Nor could they hear the echoes of valor that clung to him like a second skin, his deafness, a legacy. Of a concussive blast during a clandestine mission in the bitter cold of a forgotten conflict was a wall between him and the world. A wall too many, like Officer Miller, mistook for defiance or mental deficiency. His current existence was a quiet tapestry woven from threads of routine, a small third-floor walk-up apartment filled with more memories than furniture, a meager pension that barely stretched, and his vital twice-weekly trips to the VA hospital. These trips were not just for checkups. They were a lifeline to a brotherhood of shared silence, of understood pain, of men who, like him, had given parts of themselves to a nation that often seemed to have forgotten their names. Today's errand had been simple, almost laughably so in comparison to the complexities he once navigated. Pick up a prescription, find a parking spot, a task that had just, in a horrifying flash of yellow light and searing pain, become a public spectacle of brutality. The initial confrontation had been swift and brutal, a testament to Officer Miller's explosive impatience. He and Officer Davis had been patrolling Elm Street when Miller spotted Elias's ancient pickup truck lingering near a newly designated yet ambiguously marked no standing zone. Miller, radiating the kind of aggressive confidence that often masks insecurity, had approached with his hand already near his sidearm. "Hey, old man, you blind or just stupid? Move the truck," he'd yelled, his voice dripping with disdain. Elias, startled by the sudden appearance of the officer at his window, had fumbled to lower it, his movements slow and deliberate. He tried to point to his ears, a universal gesture for deafness, then reached for the visor where he kept a small laminated card explaining his condition and requesting written communication. But Miller wasn't interested in explanations. He saw only an old, disheveled man in a junker vehicle, seemingly ignoring a direct order. "I said, move it now," he barked, yanking Elias's door open. Elias, trying to retrieve his VA identification from his wallet, was dragged from the cab. His attempts to mouth words, to gesture, were cut short by Miller's escalating fury. "Resisting, are we? Well, see about that." Davis had opened his mouth, perhaps to suggest a calmer approach. "Miller, maybe he just can't hear you proper." But it was too late. Miller, interpreting Elias's fumbling for his wallet as reaching for a weapon, or perhaps just eager to assert his dominance, had unholstered his taser. The blinding pain, the utter humiliation, the feeling of his body betraying him as it convulsed on the unforgiving concrete. It was a fresh hell, even for a man who had known war. Bystanders gathered, phones emerging like metallic vultures, their lenses capturing Elias's degradation. Some murmured about police brutality, others about the crazy old bum who had it coming. The world swam back into focus for Elias through a haze of agonizing pain. Every muscle screamed in protest. His chest ached with a deep, burning throb, and the metallic taste of blood filled his mouth where he'd bitten his tongue. He lay sprawled on the sidewalk, the rough concrete scraping his cheek, the indignity of his position a raw wound. Officer Miller stood over him, feet planted wide. Taser still aimed, his face flushed with a mixture of adrenaline and self-importance. "That'll teach you to respect the law, old-timer," Miller sneered, already speaking into his shoulder mic, his voice loud and puffed with the thrill of the takedown. "Suspect down, non-compliant. Had to deploy the taser, requesting backup and a bus." Officer Davis hovered nearby, his face pale, his eyes flicking nervously between Elias and the growing crowd of onlookers. He looked profoundly uncomfortable, the bravado of his partner clearly not shared. Elias, fighting through the fog of pain and disorientation, made a slow, agonizing effort to reach for his worn leather wallet, still lying near the open door of his truck. Inside was his Department of Veterans Affairs ID card, his hospital appointment slip, and the precious communication card that so often failed to bridge the gap. As his fingers brushed against the cracked leather, Miller's boot came down hard, kicking the wallet skittering across the pavement. "Don't even think about it. Stay down or you'll get another dose." The threat was punctuated by a fresh crackle from the taser, a sound that now sent shivers of pure terror through Elias's already traumatized system. He closed his eyes, his breathing shallow and ragged. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing his despair. He'd faced down enemies with guns and bombs. He would endure this too. The silence from him was not submission, but a retreat into an inner fortress built over years of stoic resilience. He could hear the faint, distorted shouts, feel the vibrations of the gathering crowd, but mostly he felt the crushing weight of injustice. Backup arrived in the form of a black-and-white cruiser, its siren dying with a mournful wail. Sergeant Thompson, a man whose face bore the map of 20 years on the force, stepped out, his experienced eyes quickly taking in the scene. The old man on the ground, Miller posturing, Davis looking like he wanted to be anywhere else, and the ring of curious, phone-wielding citizens. "Miller, what in God's name is going on here?" Thompson's voice was low, tired, already anticipating a mountain of paperwork. Miller launched into a self-aggrandizing version of events, painting Elias as a belligerent, resistant threat. Elias, meanwhile, with a surge of desperate energy, born from a lifetime of needing to be understood, fumbled beneath the collar of his shirt. His fingers, numb and trembling, closed around a thin chain. He pulled, and a small tarnished metal disc, no bigger than a quarter, emerged. It wasn't a military dog tag. It was something far more discreet, almost featureless to the untrained eye. With a monumental effort, he lifted his trembling hand, the disc glinting dully in the afternoon sun. He held it towards Sergeant Thompson, his eyes pleading for understanding. Miller scoffed loudly. "Oh, here we go. Probably a Cracker Jack prize. What's he going to do? Flash a VFW card at us? Sergeant Thompson, however, silenced him with a sharp glance. He stepped closer, crouching slightly to take the offered disc. He turned it over in his fingers. It was surprisingly heavy for its size. The inscription was tiny, almost invisible without close inspection, and clearly not standard military. Issue. Thompson squinted. Project Nightfall, EV cleared level Omega. The words meant nothing to Miller or Davis, but Sergeant Thompson felt a sudden, icy dread creep up his spine. He'd attended enough interagency briefings, seen enough heavily redacted documents in his time to recognize the subtle markers of classifications that existed far, far above his pay grade, far above standard police procedure, level Omega. He'd only heard whispers of such a thing, associated with assets so critical, so deeply embedded, that their very existence was a state secret. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. This wasn't just some confused old man. This was something else entirely. Sergeant Thompson's mind raced, connecting dots that painted a terrifying picture. Level Omega. The phrase echoed with an ominous authority he'd only encountered in hushed tones during classified counterterrorism briefings years ago, briefings that dealt with threats and assets so sensitive they were practically mythological. He looked again at the old man, Elias, now struggling to sit up, his face ashen, a thin trickle of blood leaking from the corner of his mouth. Then he looked at Miller, still puffed up with misguided pride. The disconnect was horrifying. Thompson rose, his face grim. He didn't speak to Miller or Davis. He turned his back on them, walked a few paces away for privacy, and unclipped his radio. He switched to a channel rarely used, one that bypassed local dispatch entirely, connecting directly to a state-level emergency operations center with secure links. Dispatch, this is Sergeant Thompson, Oak Haven PD, badge 714. His voice was low, urgent, stripped of any local drawl. I have a code black situation involving a potential Omega-level asset. I require immediate eyes-only secure uplink to Fort Meade, Office of Special Projects. Authentication code, Crimson Shield. I repeat, Priority Alpha, Crimson Shield. This is not a drill. Silence hummed on the other end for a beat. Then a clipped professional voice acknowledged, Stand by, Sergeant Thompson. Authenticating Crimson Shield. Secure channel pending. Miller, overhearing fragments, sauntered over, a smirk on his face. Sarge, what's all the cloak and dagger stuff? Fort Meade? You really think this old buzzard warrants that kind of attention? He probably just wandered off from the local nursing home. Thompson whirled on him, his eyes blazing with a fury Miller had never witnessed. Officer Miller, you will shut your mouth. You will stand down, and you will not utter another word. Until I tell you to. You have absolutely no comprehension of the magnitude of your idiocy. The severity in Thompson's voice, the sheer venom, finally pierced Miller's bubble of arrogance. He recoiled, his smirk vanishing, replaced by a flicker of dawning fear. Davis just stared, his mouth agape. It was then that they all heard it, a low, guttural thrumming sound, rapidly growing louder. It wasn't the familiar whine of a police helicopter or an ambulance siren. This was deeper, more powerful, more menacing, the sound of multiple heavy rotors beating the air into submission. Within 4 minutes of Thompson's call, less than 6 minutes since Elias had been tased, the first of the black, unmarked MH-60 Pavehawk helicopters appeared, swooping low over the Oak Haven skyline, followed by another, then another. They weren't landing, they were establishing an aerial perimeter. The street fell into an odd, terrified silence. The thrum of the helicopters became a deafening roar as they circled overhead, their downdraft whipping debris and trash along the street, forcing bystanders to shield their eyes and huddle closer to buildings. Then, with the precision of a meticulously planned operation, 2 matte black Chevrolet Suburbans, their tinted windows reflecting the chaos like impassive eyes, screeched. to a halt, effectively sealing off both ends of the block. They were flanked by military police Humvees, soldiers in full tactical gear dismounting with practiced efficiency, creating a tight cordon. The local police, including Sergeant Thompson, suddenly looked small, insignificant, their authority utterly eclipsed. Doors of the lead Suburban opened, and several men in dark, severe suits emerged, their movements economical and purposeful. They scanned the area, their expressions unreadable, their eyes missing nothing. Leading them was a figure who commanded instant attention, a man in his late 60s dressed in a perfectly tailored civilian suit, yet carrying himself with an undeniable aura of command that no Savile Row tailoring could bestow. This was General Marcus Thorne, retired from active duty, but now a vital civilian advisor to the Joint Chiefs. A name whispered with reverence in the corridors of the Pentagon. His face was a mask of granite, his eyes sharp and piercing. He didn't glance at the local police, nor at the gawking crowd. His entire focus, laser-like, was on the disheveled old man now being gingerly helped to his feet by a paramedic who had arrived just moments before the military contingent, looking utterly bewildered by the escalating situation. General Thorne strode directly towards Elias Vance. He stopped, a respectful 2 paces away. For a moment, silence hung heavy, broken only by the idling engines and the distant whir of rotors. Then, with a movement that was sharp, precise, and imbued with a profound depth of respect, General Thorne snapped to attention and rendered a perfect, unwavering salute to the elderly, deaf man in the threadbare coat. The other military personnel and the suited figures instantly followed suit, a wave of salutes rippling through their ranks, all directed at Elias Vance. Officer Miller's jaw unhinged, his face a mask of utter disbelief. Officer Davis looked as though he was about to be physically ill. The crowd, sensing the monumental shift in power and the sheer, unbelievable gravity of the moment, was struck dumb, their phones forgotten, their mouths agape in collective shock. The air crackled, not with electricity from a taser, but with the palpable weight of hidden history and fiercely guarded honor being unveiled. General Thorne held his salute for a long moment, his gaze locked on Elias Vance, a silent communion of shared understanding passing between them. Then he slowly lowered his hand, and his voice, when he finally spoke, was low, resonant, and filled with a respect that bordered on reverence. Mr. Vance. It is an honor, sir, a distinct honor. He then turned, his eyes now chips of Arctic ice, fixing upon Sergeant Thompson. Sergeant, your report. Concise, if you please. Thompson, visibly shaken, but maintaining his composure, quickly and professionally recounted the events, starting from his arrival, highlighting his recognition of the potential significance of the medallion, and culminating in his call. He handed the small metal disc to Thorne. The general took it, his fingers tracing the faint inscription, Project Nightfall. EV, cleared level Omega. A flicker of something unreadable, pain, memory, profound respect, crossed his face. He looked back at Elias, whose own eyes, though clouded with pain and exhaustion, held a flicker of recognition for Thorne. Then Thorne's glacial gaze swept over to Officer Miller, who was now attempting to shrink into the background, his earlier bravado having evaporated like morning mist. Officer Miller. Thorne's voice was deceptively calm, yet carried the cutting edge of a finely honed blade. Is it true that you deployed a taser on this man? Miller swallowed, hard, his Adam's apple bobbing frantically. He looked to Davis for support, but Davis was staring at the ground, avoiding all eye contact. Sir, General, sir, he was non-compliant. He was in a restricted zone. He wouldn't listen to my commands. Miller stammered, his voice cracking. Thorne took a slow, deliberate step closer to Miller, his presence utterly dominating. Non-compliant? Thorne's voice dropped to a lethal whisper. This man is Elias Vance. He is profoundly deaf, an injury he sustained during Operation Nightfall in the winter of 1987. An operation, I might add, where he single-handedly prevented a catastrophic intelligence breach that would have compromised national security at the highest level, and in the process saved the lives of 3 Delta Force operators who were ambushed and cut off. He did this while under heavy fire already. Wounded. Thorne paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The entire street seemed to hold its breath. "This man, Officer Miller," Thorne continued, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper, "doesn't just have security clearance. He designed many of the encrypted communication protocols this nation relies upon to this very day to protect its most sensitive assets. This restricted zone you were so diligently, so aggressively protecting? Elias Vance likely possesses more intrinsic authority to stand on this particular piece of concrete than your entire police department combined, including your chief of police and your mayor." He gestured curtly to one of his aides, a stern-faced woman in a dark suit. "Agent Rivera, get their badge numbers, get their names, get their service records. The chief of police will be receiving a call from my office within the hour. I anticipate internal affairs will be keenly interested, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Department of Justice takes a very close look at the Oak Haven Police Department's training, or clear lack thereof." Officer Miller's face had gone from red to a sickly, mottled white. He looked as if he might collapse. Davis, beside him, finally looked up, his expression one of dawning horror and profound shame. The silent, watching crowd was a tableau of stunned realization, the earlier jeers and casual recordings now replaced by a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Paramedics, who had initially been hesitant, now moved with renewed urgency and deference, gently assisting Elias towards one of the waiting black Suburbans. General Thorne himself opened the door, his demeanor solicitous and deeply respectful. "We'll get you to Walter Reed, Elias," he said softly, close to Elias's good ear, using his first name with a familiarity that spoke volumes. "A full checkup, the best care. No arguments." Elias managed a weak nod, his tired eyes conveying a gratitude that needed no words. As Elias was settled into the vehicle, Thorne turned back to the assembled local police. His gaze lingered on Sergeant Thompson for a moment. "Sergeant," he said, his tone softening almost imperceptibly, "your prompt and correct assessment of the situation, once you understood the potential implications of that medallion, has been duly noted. You showed commendable judgment under pressure. That will be communicated through official channels." Thompson nodded, a nod of tension easing in his chest, though his face remained grim. Then Thorne's eyes hardened again as they fell upon Officers Miller and Davis. "As for you two," he stated, his voice devoid of any warmth, "you will surrender your badges and service weapons to your supervising officer upon his arrival. You are on administrative leave, effective immediately. A full, exhaustive investigation into your conduct will commence before sunset. Be assured, Officer Miller, your penchant for escalating situations and your clear disregard for basic de-escalation protocols will be a primary focus." He didn't raise his voice, but the finality in his tone was more chilling than any shout. "The Oak Haven Police Department," Thorne announced, his voice now carrying to the wider group of officers who had arrived, "will be undergoing a comprehensive review of its training programs, particularly concerning interaction with citizens with disabilities and de-escalation techniques. This will be federally monitored. Consider this day one of your new curriculum." With a final curt nod, "General." Thorne entered the Suburban. The heavy doors closed with a solid, definitive thud. The convoy of black vehicles, sirens now silent but their official presence screaming authority, pulled away smoothly, leaving behind a scene of utter disarray and profound mortification. For the local law enforcement, the crowd, which had filmed Miller's aggressive arrest with a mixture of condemnation and morbid curiosity, now watched the departure of the military convoy with a palpable sense of awe, many of them slowly lowering their phones, a collective shame settling over them for having witnessed and perhaps tacitly condoned the mistreatment of a silent hero. Captain Howard, Sergeant Thompson's direct superior, arrived moments later, his face a mask of thunder, having been urgently summoned by a series of increasingly frantic calls that had cascaded up the chain of command following Thompson's priority Alpha alert. His first act was to personally, and very publicly, strip a stunned and trembling Officer Miller of his badge and weapon. Davis, looking utterly defeated, preemptively offered his own. The full weight of General Thorne's pronouncements during the dramatic confrontation had laid bare the hidden history Elias Vance carried. Operation Nightfall, a name that meant nothing to the average citizen or even most police officers, was clearly a mission of immense significance shrouded in secrecy. Thorne's words painted a vivid, albeit brief, picture. Elias not as a frail old man, but as a critical operative, a linchpin in a desperate situation facing down enemy forces, his actions directly preventing a disaster of national proportions. The deafness, which Officer Miller had callously dismissed as belligerence or stupidity, was revealed as a wound of honor, a permanent sacrifice made in the line of an unseen, unsung duty. The small, unassuming metal disc, cleared level Omega, was no mere trinket, but a key unlocking a past filled with courage and brilliance that had been deliberately concealed for decades. It signified a level of trust and responsibility so profound that it placed Elias Vance in an elite, almost mythical, category of national assets. Thorne's revelation that Elias had designed secure communication protocols underscored not just bravery, but a formidable intellect, a mind that had helped build the very safeguards of the nation. The contrast between the humble, threadbare appearance of Elias and the monumental importance of his past service was a stunning indictment of superficial judgment. The onlookers, the officers, everyone present had seen an elderly, perhaps confused man. General Thorne, and by extension, the full might of the Pentagon, saw a hero, a legend, a man to whom the country owed an unpayable debt. The 6 minutes of Miller's brutal misjudgment were now cast in the harsh light of this truth, exposing an ignorance so profound it was almost criminal. The entire incident served as an explosive unveiling, a forced anagnorisis for everyone who had witnessed Elias's humiliation, compelling them to confront the uncomfortable reality that heroes rarely wear capes. Sometimes they wear faded coats and carry the invisible scars of their valor. Elias Vance, the quiet, unassuming deaf veteran, was not only vindicated, but his extraordinary hidden heroism was dramatically thrust into the unforgiving light of public awareness. The officers who had so grievously mistreated him, particularly Officer Miller, faced immediate and severe consequences, their careers irrevocably altered, if not ended. Their entire department was now under intense scrutiny, mandated for immediate and comprehensive reform, a clear signal that such egregious failures in judgment and protocol would no longer be tolerated. The Pentagon's swift, decisive, and overwhelming intervention served as an undeniable testament to the profound gravity of their error, and to the enduring, if often unseen, respect commanded by individuals like Elias Vance. His dignity, so cruelly assaulted on the public street, was restored tenfold, wrapped in the undeniable authority and gratitude of the nation he had served so selflessly. This harrowing incident serves as a stark and potent reminder. True heroes often walk among us, unseen, unheard, their sacrifices unacknowledged, their valor hidden beneath the patina of ordinary life. The scars they bear, whether visible reminders like Elias's deafness or the invisible wounds etched upon their souls, are solemn testaments to the burdens they have carried, to sacrifices we, in our comfortable civilian lives, may never truly comprehend. True respect is not, and should never be, a courtesy reserved only for a pristine uniform or a visible badge of honor. It is a fundamental decency earned by character, by integrity, and by selfless service, regardless of an individual's current circumstances, their age, their appearance, or their perceived status. We must never, ever judge a book by its worn and faded cover. For beneath even the most unassuming exterior can lie a story of unimaginable courage, resilience, and profound history-shaping significance. Weeks later, the ripples of that fateful afternoon continued to spread. Officer Davis, pale and humbled, was observed on restricted desk duty at the Oak Haven Police Precinct, patiently, painstakingly using a small whiteboard and a marker to communicate with an elderly woman who was struggling to report a minor incident, her own hearing clearly impaired. He made eye contact. He waited. He wrote clearly. A man visibly changed. The arrogance stripped away, replaced by a hesitant empathy. Officer Miller was no longer with the force. His dismissal had been swift. Elias Vance, meanwhile, found himself in slightly less sparse surroundings. General Thorne had paid a quiet, unofficial visit to his small apartment, not as a Pentagon official, but as one old soldier to another. They shared a pot of strong coffee. The silence comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding, a new state-of-the-art hearing aid, discreetly misplaced by a grateful, anonymous colleague from Walter Reed, now rested in Elias's ear, offering him clearer access to the world he had fought to protect. At the local VA hospital, a small, unassuming bronze plaque was quietly installed in the hallway of the audiology department. It bore no names, no grand pronouncements, just a simple, poignant dedication. To the silent sentinels of Project Nightfall, your sacrifices echo in our freedom. Elias saw it on his next visit, and for the first time in many years, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. The world is indeed full of unsung heroes, individuals whose quiet contributions and hidden sacrifices form the bedrock of our society. If you believe in the profound importance of honoring their service, of recognizing their inherent dignity, and of treating every single individual with the respect they are due, then subscribe to Hidden Sparks for more true tales of hidden greatness and unwavering courage. Let's work together to ensure that no hero is ever forgotten, dismissed, or disrespected again. Their stories deserve to be told.